woods surrounding the field outside were dark, and a full moon hung in the sky above. Staring at the glowing white ball from the window beside her bed, Alicia patted the bump on her scalp. Her head was hurting a lot less than it had been that morning, but the bruise beneath her hair was still somewhat tender. As she let her eyes trail downward, she saw that the moon had lit up one side of the barn. She recalled the horses she'd seen during her attempted escape and decided that, though she wasn't really up for it, the thought of taking a late-night horseback ride sounded like heaven. According to the clock on the nightstand, she had been sleeping for several hours. The time leading up to that sleep was hazy, but she distinctly remembered Nick, the young man who'd said he brought her here, had come into her room several times while she was resting to ask her if she was all right. He was an attractive man with his dark blonde hair and mysterious brown eyes. His exterior didn't seem to match his personality. She got the feeling there was something very important he was hesitating to tell her. And while she didn't have the faintest idea of what that something might be, she couldn't shake the feeling that the two of them had known one another before she'd lost her memory. Alicia envisioned the photo she'd seen, the one of the bride and groom. Picturing the bride's perfectly coiffed curls and eyes that were almost turquoise, she reasoned that she had no idea where the name Marie had come from, but that saying it had felt like the most natural thing in the world. The groom had blonde hair like his bride and deep brown irises. Both he and the woman seemed familiar to her, and they both bore a striking resemblance to her captor, Nick. Alicia couldn't prove she had a connection to the bride and groom, or to Nick, but she sensed she wasn't a woman who took things lying down. She intended to learn exactly who the people in the photograph were. Then she was going to figure out why she had forgotten her past, and she would go back to living her life, whatever that life entailed. She was going to get as far away from this place as possible, and she would forget about this blip of time like the bad dream it was. Keeping one hand on the bedpost, Alicia got to her feet. She caught a glimpse of her reflection and decided that a change of clothes was in order before she headed downstairs. After combing her hair and putting on a long black skirt and a blouse that fit her a lot better than the sweater she'd selected earlier, she entered the massive second-floor hallway. As she moved along, she became aware that the scent of garlic and butter was strong in the air. Nick had given her breakfast, but she hadn't had anything to eat since. Whatever was being cooked downstairs smelled like a feast, and it was a feast she wanted very much to have an exclusive invitation to. Alicia walked down the stairs and made her way from the house's enormous foyer to the place the delicious aroma was coming from, the kitchen. As she entered the room and moved past a granite countertop that seemed to go on for a mile, she discovered a large wooden table, atop which stood a vase with an arrangement of artificial irises. She saw no trace of the meal she'd been expecting to find. Turning around, Alicia noted that the countertop was clean, and no pots or pans had recently been washed. But as she started walking back the way she'd come, she realized the room connected to another one, and the scent of meat and potatoes was strong on the other side of the door. Alicia stepped through it and entered what appeared to be the dining room. The light was dimmer there than in the kitchen, and a cherry, oval-shaped table stood in the center of the floor. It had been covered with a white lace tablecloth, atop which were plates and wine glasses. A bottle of wine and candelabra had been placed between them. The candles inside of it had both been lit. As she approached the table, Alicia was overcome by the strangest desire to close her eyes. As she did, she pictured herself sitting at that same table, wearing a floor-length emerald gown. Her chair was pushed in for her, and wine was poured into her glass. Someone's leg brushed against hers, a man's, a very attractive man's. She couldn't see his face, but she sensed his warm presence as he sat in the chair across from hers. His scent was masculine, spicy, intoxicating. The deliberate caress of his kneecaps sent shivers up her spine. Alicia realized she was no longer dreaming as a hand touched her shoulder. She turned to see that Nick was standing beside her. Clean-shaven and hair neatly combed, he was wearing a dress shirt and pants and smelled as though he'd just returned from a brisk walk through the woods. His brown eyes twinkled. Coming closer, he gave her what she was certain was a deliberately charming smile. The strangest feeling of warmth pooled someplace deep inside of her. "What is all of this?" She gestured toward the table. "All of what? Oh, you mean this?" Nick pointed to a cart on the opposite side of the room. After wheeling it toward them, he took a dome from atop a metal dish and revealed a smoking cut of sirloin along with asparagus and, just as she'd suspected, mashed potatoes. "Did you make this for me?" Alicia's empty stomach growled. Having decided apparently to answer her question with gestures instead of words, Nick approached the head of the table. He pulled back a chair and inclined his head toward it. Alicia hesitated, but a second whiff of the mashed potatoes had her reconsidering her resistance. She sat in the chair and laughed as Nick sported a coy expression and pushed her in toward the table. "A true gentleman, and everyone says they don't exist." "Oh, we definitely exist, just we're a lot harder to come by." "I see," Alicia said as he poured wine into her glass. "Actually, monsieur, however gentlemanly you may appear, I'm not really sure I ought to be having that, as much as I would like some." "What, this?" "It's sparkling cider." Nick added a hearty sample of the pale yellow liquid to his own glass. "I'm guessing you would have preferred something with a little more of a kick to it, but I'm not exactly sure alcohol's the best thing for you to be having right now." Alicia grazed her scalp with her fingertips. "I think I'd have to agree with you on that one." "That's very considerate of you. Thank you." "My pleasure." Nick lifted the tray of food and put it between their place settings. After carving the sirloin steak, he divided it between them. "You're certainly acting different tonight. Not that I minded when you aren't behaving like a complete ass, but this song and dance can't be solely on account of your being a gentleman, as you're suddenly referring to yourself. Is there some sort of special occasion I should know about?" "Nothing special." Nick lowered one brow as he dished out some of the asparagus and laid it beside her meat. "Just what would you know about members of the opposite sex, anyhow? I was under the impression you didn't remember a thing about your life prior to waking up in my guest room last night." "I don't, but—" Alicia studied his rugged face. "I have a feeling about it." Nick gave each of them a generous portion of the mashed potatoes. He failed to return her gaze. "I have feelings about lots of things," Alicia went on, compelled to state the fact out loud. Her dinner companion, who appeared to be very focused on cutting his own meat, asked, "Like what?" "Random things, like the photo I saw in the bedroom of the bride and groom." Alicia wasn't entirely sure she wanted to reveal more, but found herself saying, "This morning when I stepped out of the shower, I swear I saw something. It only lasted a minute, but it felt as if there was a movie playing in my mind. What I saw felt real to me, almost as though it was a memory from a dream." "What did you see?" Nick's complexion paled to the color of clay. "I saw myself. I was a little girl, and I was riding a horse through a meadow. A man was standing nearby, and he had a mustache. I got the feeling he was someone very important to me." Nick pointed to the mashed potatoes on her plate. "Have you tried these? They're delicious, really. You have to try them." "Did you make them?" "Not exactly." "I guess I'll have to try them then, seeing as how they weren't made by the chef, whose house specialty is dry cereal." Alicia helped herself to several savory bites. "Not bad, but why do I get the feeling you're only trying to distract me because you don't want me to focus on the memory I was just describing to you?" "Was that a memory?" Nick tossed back a swallow of cider as though it were wine. "It kind of sounded like more of a hallucination, if you ask me." "Well, I'm sure you'd like me to think it was a hallucination, but Excuse me? If this vision you were having, this dream or what have you, was actually a memory, why wouldn't I want you to know it?" "I'm not sure." Alicia laid her hands on the table. "Maybe because my remembering my life doesn't fit into your plan of keeping me here?" Her host didn't answer her, and, much to her frustration, he turned his attention over to focusing on his meal. Dessert came afterward, apple pie, which Nick had kept hidden while they polished off the main course. Aside from cautioning her to eat slowly and to sit back if she felt dizzy, he didn't speak to her again until there was nothing left on their plates but crumbs. "I mentioned to you that we're in Mohegan Lake," he said sometime later, "in Westchester County, New York. Does the name of the town, the county, or the state sound at all familiar to you?" "Not really." Alicia racked her brain. "Should they?" Nick shrugged. "Only if you think they should. So you really don't remember anything about your life, your friends, or your career before waking up in this house?" "My career?" Alicia dropped her empty glass onto the table. Having felt a sensation comparable to an electric shock when he'd said the word career, she asked, "What is it I do, exactly? Am I a lawyer? Do I perform surgeries alongside a team of brain surgeons?" "Something like that," Nick answered with a secretive smile. Furious that he refused to tell her whatever he knew about her life, Alicia said, You must be holding out on me because you're familiar with my work, and the knowledge of my success makes you feel completely emasculated. I never said, understandable, considering that you appear to spend the majority of your time hiding out in the woods, collecting the latest editions from Williams-Sonoma and Pottery Barn. Failing to offer anything in the way of a response, Nick grunted. I may not remember what I do for a living, but there's no doubt in my mind that I'm capable of doing a lot of interesting things. Are you now? Her companion gave her a thoughtful glance. He got to his feet and extended his hand. How about sharing a dance with me? Alicia's face became as hot as the candle flames. Looking from Nick's open palm to the empty room around them, she swallowed and said, There's no music. Well, I think we can do something about that. Nick wandered across the floor to the area behind the curio cabinet. A stereo stood there, which Alicia hadn't noticed before. He pressed a button, causing the room to fill with soft, romantic music. Nick extended his hand once more as he came toward her. His smile was cool but also insistent, and it contained a hint of danger. Dark brown eyes looked into hers, willing her to trust, to comply with her mysterious yet compelling desires. Allowing herself to operate on instinct, Alicia slipped her hand into Nick's. His warmth surrounded her, filling her with a hint of anticipation as he urged her gently forward. Nick led her into the middle of the floor. Placing one large hand against her waist, he brought her beside his powerful, broad frame. They began to move, and Alicia swayed in unison with her partner, as though they had danced together 1,000 times before. In her mind, she was in the arms of a stranger, but her body reacted as though he was anything but, as though he were someone whom she knew intimately. Nick's eyes, his scent, the very feel of him seemed familiar to her. His hand slid from her hip to the small of her back. She ought to be telling him he was getting too close, except she didn't want him to back away. It felt good being close to him like this. As her partner drew her closer still, Alicia felt chills, yet at the same time she began to let go of the tension she was holding. She was encased in a blanket of heat, and as that blanket spun her around and brought her back against its softness, she was taken into a realm of comfort and dreams. Dancing with her captor felt right to her, and in a strange way safe. Nick had gone out of his way to make her happy tonight, and she got the feeling that wasn't something he did every day. Letting her eyes fall closed, she inched beside him, and when he didn't resist, she rested her head against the cushion of his shoulder. Nick's arms enveloped her, and Alicia became aware that he didn't only smell of pine wood, but of something darker, something she couldn't quite define. She sensed a degree of rebelliousness in this man, and for some strange reason the idea of that intrigued her. Strength seemed to emanate from every part of him, and she wondered what it would be like to taste that strength. Filled with the strongest desire to do just that, she settled her hand against the back of his neck and tilted his head so she could just about feel what she so desperately wanted to. Kiss me, she insisted, lifting her chin. Nick stilled but didn't comply. She opened her eyes to find his lips were looming above hers. Alicia, The music stopped playing as if on cue. Nick held her, not quite letting go, but not doing what she'd asked him to, either. After a long moment, he released her. He cleared his throat and shifted his eyes, making sure she was steady on her feet before backing away. He paced the length of the room. I'm glad you're feeling better. Nick stopped in front of the table. I'll get this cleaned up. You ought to get back to bed. You've had a hell of a day, and even though you slept a good bit of it, you still need your rest. I'll be up to check on you in a few hours. Good night, Alicia. Turning to hide a face that was surely as red as it felt, Alicia walked to the door. She offered a cool smile along with a wave before slipping soundlessly from the room. Alone in the foyer, Alicia placed one hand over her trembling mouth. She released it a moment later, body braced against the wall, as she said to herself quietly, Good night, Nicholas.